What's going on, people? Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell for me. Yeah, so who should Moses Itauma fight next? In my mind, there are really three guys that I think he should be focused on. Philip Hrgović, I think, is most people's choice. Andy Ruiz, and I'll say, well, technically four. The winner of Wardley Dubois. So let's start with Hrgović. I think he's the number one option for a lot of reasons. He's tough, right? Hrgović, the same shots that flatlined Anthony Joshua, Philip Hrgović took round after round after round. Now, he did get stopped by Dubois, but given the kind of damage Daniel Dubois is capable of, I don't think people realize how scary it would actually be to fight Daniel Dubois. And again, that's credit to Usyk. I have my bone to pick with him. I'll talk about that a bit later. But you have to credit Usyk for being able to defuse that bomb not once but twice. We saw what happened when Anthony Joshua fought Dubois. As soon as he got clipped, he panicked and he looked like someone who had never boxed a day in his life. But Philip Hrgović, to his credit, even though he was extremely tired from over-exerting himself in the first 4 to 5 rounds, he finished that fight on his feet. So he's tough, he's durable, he's aggressive. Hrgović, people say he can't punch, but I think it comes down more to technique. I think that he throws a lot of arm punches, and he's just trying to touch you. In a way, he's kind of like a Winky Wright. He doesn't put everything he can into the punch, and that helps him stay safe. But I think if Hrgović really sat down on his punches, he could inflict a lot of damage. But he chooses to keep it simple, lots of 1-2s, occasional left hook. He might vary up, the backhand and chop it down. He's really good at that. But, he keeps it simple, he keeps it basic, but he's aggressive. And he keeps coming, great chin. Stamina could be an issue, but one could argue that Moses Itauma might have some stamina issues and some pacing issues. I argue it's the latter, but we shall see, because Hrgović is going to put him under a lot of pressure. He's going to throw punches in bunches. He's going to be someone at the press conference who I think is actually going to try and goad Itauma and try and get under his skin. We need to see that as well, because boxing is a mental game. It's a mental game. And so, when you have guys who are competing in a sport where not only can you get publicly embarrassed, not only can you be stripped of your manhood in a sense, not only can you lose your livelihood, you can also die. That's the reality. So when you factor in the mental component of it, we need to see how a guy can react when somebody puts them under pressure, not just in a physical sense, but in a mental sense. And I think Hrgović will do that. He's cocky, he's arrogant. Personally, I think he's kind of funny. He seems to have a kind of a dry Eastern European style of humor. And so I think that's a fantastic fight. It's number one on my list. I hope that fight happens. I hope Hrgović doesn't price himself out. And I think it'd be a fantastic fight. I do expect Itauma to win. No chin is unbreakable. I think I heard it was either Hatman or Ade say, I don't think that Hrgović can be knocked out. Anybody can get knocked out, and he's been hurt. And if we're going to talk about mental fragility for a second, Hrgović didn't really protest that hard in the Dubois fight when the doctor chose to stop it. Hrgović seemed relieved. People could say, oh, there were a couple headbutts, they both were fighting dirty. Dubois was coming in with his head, but Hrgović was hitting on the back of the head, which he's known to do. So they both were fighting dirty. It was a dog fight. And at the end of the day, the guy that people compare to the cowardly lion outdogged him. That's just the reality. Dubois showed more dog in that fight. So I think if Itauma can put it on him, if Itauma can petrify him and paralyze him with his speed, I expect Itauma to stop him. It might be round 8 or round 9, but I expect Moses Itauma to stop him. Too fast, too strong, too young, too fresh. But there's danger. So Filip Hrgović, number 1 on that list. An interesting one would be, for number 2, Andy Ruiz. Why Andy Ruiz? He's got fast hands. He's an ex-champion. He's aggressive. He's a pressure fighter. Never been knocked out himself. He's been dropped. You know, Chris Arreola put him down, and I believe Luis Ortiz did too, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe not. But I know Chris Arreola did. So we have those factors, but of course, it's another AJ opponent, and so that would make it interesting. You know, if you're Frank Warren, why not just establish this pattern, right? He's already, you know, he being Moses Itauma, has already knocked out 2 AJ opponents. Now, Dillian White, that's not the same Dillian that AJ fought, clearly, right? Much younger, much fresher, way more aggressive. That Dillian White looked drained. He looked like he took Ozempic or Zepbound or something like that. And he looked drained, he looked weak. He looked like a man who was just there to collect a paycheck, you know, and you know, I wasn't really impressed with that fight. You know, Dillian White, he sold us a bill of goods. He did all that talking, and you know, he lost all that weight so he could have a 6-pack, and then went out there and completely shit the bed, you know. So I'm not really interested. I don't really weigh that win that highly, or that heavily, I should say. But you know, you look at the Franklin win. That's a solid win. That's a B tier win. And if Itauma is able to go and knock out Andy Ruiz in his next fight, that's, again, you can build the narrative that you can sell to the casual fan. Hardcores like you and I, of course, we're gonna know the truth, but the casual fans will see the pattern and be like, man, this guy is beating up all of AJ's ex-opponents. And you start to build that chatter. You know, AJ already left Ben Davison, so there's no longer that conflict of interest. Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, they seem to be on good terms. I think mainly due to their mutual hatred of Dana White and Turki Al-Sheikh to a certain extent, especially with Frank Warren. So there's no promotional barriers, there's no network barriers. If Moses Itauma knocks out Andy Ruiz, people are gonna start calling for him to fight AJ, because at that point the list keeps getting smaller and smaller. It's really only like 10 people that most fans would deem to be acceptable for Moses. So if he knocks out Andy Ruiz, a guy who's never been knocked out, a guy who stopped Anthony Joshua, a guy who had a really, really close fight with Joseph Parker. Some people say he won, and Parker was the beneficiary of home cooking in New Zealand. You know, the chatter's only gonna get louder. And, you know, again, is AJ obligated to fight Itauma? No. The only heavyweight from the previous era, because I do think we've entered a new era now, right? I think the Joshua Fury Usyk era, they had their 10 years, you know, and I think that we're in a new era now. Clearly, we're moving on. But the only heavyweight from the previous era I think is obligated to fight Moses is Usyk, and that's because he has the belts. you know. And right now he's been on some bullshit. There's no other way to put it, right? I respect Usyk. He's a great champion, first ballot Hall of Famer, all of that. If I saw him, I'd probably fanboy, ask for a picture, all of that. But the reality is this Rico Verhoeven fight is a disgrace, right? We don't want to see him fight a kickboxer. We want to see him tested because he's still the champion. And if you're a champion, it's your obligation and your duty to fight the best. I hate these goofy fanboys and a lot of these pundits too who say Usyk can do whatever he wants. And I heard Itauma'S say that, but Itauma'S, he knows he doesn't have the power and the clout to really say what he wants right now. So he's trying to fly under the radar. He's trying to be media friendly. He's trying to get all the brand deals, right? He's endorsed by Nike, I believe. So he's trying to be PC and play it safe right now. But I hate it when people say a champion can do whatever he wants. No, he can't. The champion should get the larger cut of the purse, yes. The champion should be able to fight in a venue of his choice, yes. The city of his choice, yes. I'm fine with all that. There should be an advantage to being champion, but it doesn't mean you get to pick and choose who you want to fight, right? They're the same goofies who said that with Fury, same idiots who said that with Canelo, with Floyd. Your obligation as champion is to unify and fight the best contenders. And Usyk doesn't want to do that. So that doesn't sit right with me. But, you know, getting back to Joshua, see, there I go, ranting. I took notes and I still end up ranting. But no, I don't think Joshua is obligated to fight Itauma'S. However, if he did, you'd have to give him the utmost respect. And people say, oh, well, Cam, you're just an AJ fanboy. True, but it's not a fight that he needs to take, right? AJ's legacy is kind of set. I think people will remember him as a good champion, but a flawed champion, right? He's good, but he wasn't great. Good power, good speed, good combinations, but there was a bit of mental fragility. And he maybe didn't have the best punch resistance, and there were technical flaws too, especially defensively, just coming into the game late. And I think that's the biggest difference between an Itauma'S and a Joshua. You know, it's almost like if you took a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old from, let's say, Mexico, and you bring them to the United States, after 10 years, who's more likely to speak better English, right? It's gonna be the kid who was brought at 10, right? He might not even have a strong accent at that point, whereas the 18-year-old will still have a heavy accent and probably won't speak it as fluently. And you see that with Joshua and Itauma'S. Itauma'S started boxing at 10, and he grew into boxing, right? AJ started at what, 18, 20? And you can still see he doesn't have complete control over his movement. The biomechanics are kind of off because he was programmed when his mind was no longer as malleable, right? So they're both freak athletes. I think if Joshua and Itauma'S grew up in the United States, they for sure be in the NFL, for sure, right? That's a whole conversation. You know, they would not be boxing if they grew up in the U.S. They're phenomenal athletes. So the difference is one started at an age where he was able to develop that muscle memory, and Joshua was just kind of a big, strong dude who only knew how to move as a big, strong guy. And so I think that's why Moses moves with so much more fluidity, his combinations, his instinct, and his poise, right? Because he's been fighting from such a young age, it, there's a level of serenity that comes with that, that you don't really see with Joshua. You see that with Fury, Usyk, Itauma, right? These guys, they don't, when they get caught, well, maybe not Itauma. He hasn't really been caught yet, to be fair. But when Fury and Usyk, when they get caught, what do? They don't panic. They remain under control, and they figure out how to survive, how to stay safe, how to buy themselves time. Joshua kind of panics. So, I would expect Itauma to win. It's not totally out of the possibility that AJ beats him. Again, we haven't seen Itauma take a good shot. And if AJ's anything, he's a prolific puncher. And when he's calm and relaxed, he does have some skill. People say he has no skill. I think that is hyperbolic, like I think a lot of the criticism of AJ is, because he's so polarizing to a lot of people, especially in the UK. People just say just ridiculous things, but I think he does have skill. I think he does have great attributes. He's bigger than Itauma. But I just think it's just a point where Itauma's too young, too quick, too skilled. And AJ's taken a lot of damage in his career. He's had some tough fights. And who knows where his mentals are at, I'll touch on the Usyk AJ bromance maybe in another video and give my thoughts, but Usyk can't fight for him. So we'll see. If Joshua takes it, respect to him, but I don't think he will. Moving on, the last two people I want to talk about are Fabio Wardley and Daniel Dubois. I was going to talk about Joseph Parker. I'll touch on him for a second. I think Parker would be interesting, but I just don't think he has the firepower. I think we saw that in the Wardley fight. Wardley, who I think is nowhere near as defensively gifted as Itauma. He's not as cute. He's not as intelligent. Gave Joseph Parker all that he could handle. People say Parker fought the wrong fight. He could have outboxed Wardley. Maybe. I don't know. I don't view Parker as just this world level boxer. I think he's pretty fast for a guy his size. But the power's just not there. And he can be hurt. He can be caught, again, by guys who don't have that much skill. Not nearly as much skill or speed as Itauma, right? Zhang, worst gas tank in the history of heavyweight boxing, put him down. Joe Joyce, one of the slowest heavyweights I've ever seen in my life, knocked Joseph Parker out. And you can say, oh, well, that was his first fight with Andy Lee. Maybe, but if Joe Joyce can catch you, Moses Itauma can catch him. But finally, the winner between Wardley and Daniel Dubois. Who do I think would win? Well, first of all, I think Daniel Dubois is going to actually beat Fabio Wardley. People say Dubois has no heart, and that, when things get tough, he quits. But it's really only against Usyk that we saw him quit. People say he quit against Joe Joyce. I don't think he quit at all. I think that was a smart decision. I think his corner should have stopped the fight, just given how gruesome that eye injury was. He couldn't continue. And I don't think that someone should be called a quitter or a pussy because they don't want to lose their eye, right? You fought him, you fought hard, and at the end of the day, your eye was cooked and you decided to save yourself for another day, as opposed to a Billy Joe Saunders who was heavily critical of Dubois. Billy Joe quit on his stool. That's a fact. When he fought Canelo and Canelo broke his eye, he quit on his stool. He didn't even come out after all that talking he did. You know, Daniel Dubois fought on against a heavyweight for a few rounds before he decided he had enough. So I don't think he quit against Joe Joyce. Usyk is Usyk. For whatever reason, Usyk just has Dubois under a spell to where Dubois can't even seem to function. You know, it's just very, very weird. Very weird. I mean, it's just interesting how Usyk is able to manipulate these guys, you know, and he's not beating them with power. He's just beating them with speed, with movement, to the point where Dubois just is mentally exhausted. You know, Tony Bellew touched on that, how Usyk just mentally drains guys. So, you know, there's no shame in that, you know. But you look at his other fights, right, against Big Baby Miller, a lot of adversity. One, the mental component. Big Baby was trying to bully him throughout the entire build-up, calling him dumb, calling him slow. And, you know, Dubois, in his own way, stood his ground, you know, from a verbal standpoint, and then stood his ground in the ring. Same thing with Filip Hrgović. Hrgović tried to bully him. Hrgović tried to bully him at the beginning of the fight, right? Hrgović just spamming the 1-2. He was throwing like 80 punches around and just punched himself out because he was certain he was going to stop Dubois and Dubois was going to fold. Dubois showed a lot of heart in that fight. And in the AJ fight, now you could say, well, that fight was one-way traffic. And there are rumors that Dubois knocked out AJ in sparring 10 years prior. And I believe them to be true because AJ looked scared to death with Dubois. But Dubois still had to come out in front of 100,000 people in London and perform when everybody was certain he was going to lose, right? To quote Simon Jordan, that was a coronation for AJ because that was supposed to be AJ's night. And he went out, you know, he being Daniel Dubois, went out there and did his thing, you know. So I don't think he's mentally weak. And I think he has all the skills, all the tools to beat Fabio. I think he has a good chin. Yeah, I know he got laid out in his last fight, but that was just heavyweight boxing. Again, it wasn't like he was even out cold, you know. Usyk just hit him with a great shot, and, you know, that's that. Again, you could say it was quitting, perhaps, but sometimes you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. I don't think that Fabio Wardley has the firepower. Yes, he punches harder than Usyk, but I don't think he has the offensive artillery necessary to dissuade Daniel Dubois. More importantly, he doesn't have the defense. He's going to get touched. And I do agree with the analysis other guys have made. I'm not going to claim to come up with it myself, but other channels have made that if Daniel Dubois can touch you, it doesn't matter if you're hitting him back as long as he knows he's inflicting damage on you. I do think that he's encouraged, and that'll, you know, spur him on and allow him to keep fighting even when he's under duress. You know, he's knowing I'm hitting you and I'm touching you, right? The 3 fights he lost, it was when he really couldn't damage his opponents, right? Joe Joyce just had him behind the jab, and of course Usyk is just a wizard. You know what I mean? So that was a long-winded way of saying I think Daniel Dubois will beat Fabio Wardley. If he and Itauma fight each other, I think that Itauma would start off as a heavy favorite, but one, we've never seen Itauma get hit by somebody like that. And Moses himself has acknowledged that Dubois has a hell of a jab. You know, Dave Allen commented on that, you know, Dubois' jab feels like a right hand, you know? So there's going to be a power factor. There's going to be a speed factor. There's going to be an athleticism factor, right? I think that Daniel Dubois is, I would say Moses is more athletic because he's more fluid, right? Daniel Dubois is very stiff. But just in terms of raw speed and bounce and power, I think Daniel Dubois can match Moses when it comes to physicality. And it'd be interesting to see, right? I think that Moses would obviously has a better footwork, the better ring IQ. And I think power is about a wash. But I think the difference will be Moses' speed. And, you know, from the eye test, that would make me lean towards Moses. However, Moses has not faced any adversity. Daniel Dubois, who's still young himself, he's like, what, 27? So he's still pretty young himself, is very experienced. And I think people aren't factoring that in. He's fought Joshua, he's fought Usyk, he's fought Big Baby, he's fought Hrgovic, you know, Kevin Lerena, that's not a bad name to have on your resume. That's a decent fighter. And yeah, he's won some, he's lost some, but he's experienced and he's still here. He's still fresh, you know? And so when you've been through the fire like that, that's gotta give you some level of confidence. Even though you've taken some losses, you're still here, you know, you're a survivor. So I wouldn't count Dubois out. I would say 60-40 in favor of Itauma. And that's probably being overly generous, but that's how highly I rate Itauma. And this video is getting pretty long, so I'll touch on Wardley briefly. If Wardley beats Dubois, I don't think he will. But if he does, I don't think he has what it takes to trouble Itauma. I think that Wardley, to me, yes, he has world-class heart. I don't think he has world-class boxing ability. I think that his power is devastating. There's no doubt about that. But he can be outboxed. He can be backed up. He can be hurt, right? Nathan Gorman hurt him. Justice Hooney hurt him. Frazier Clark hurt him. And Joseph Parker hurt him. None of those guys are big punchers. None of them, right? And they all gave him problems. Justice Hooney, in my opinion, gave him the most problems. And Justice Hooney is regarded by many as being feather-fisted. So I think Itauma, too strong, too fast, too smart. He takes Wardley out easily. Which is why I think Fabio is happy to kind of hide behind we're training partners, we're basically brothers. And if, you know, we're in a situation where we both have belts, then we'll just be like Vitaly and Vladimir and we'll beat up everybody else, but we won't fight each other. He wasn't speaking like a man who was confident that he could beat Itauma. If he was confident, he would say, hey, listen, you know, we're friends, but we'll set that to the side. Let's get paid, right? Let's make some money. It'll be a big fight. Why wouldn't you take it? He's your mandatory. So in theory, you should fight him. I mean, are you going to be strict? Or what are you going to do? I don't know. I didn't like the way Fabio was talking. That didn't sound like a champion. That sounded like a belt holder looking to milk the belt for money and clout and avoid tough fights. That's how it came across to me. But this video is almost 30 minutes long, so I'm gonna cut it here, guys. Again, remember, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.